Aha. That come up on the screen okay? Have a big insole. Let's start at the opening to the insole in the bottom. This is something that I think you probably don't have there, but is traditional in a Zen temple, as you would have the inscription on the Han, and the Han being this big slab of wood on which there's a piece of a little verse, a piece of poetry, and the sound that it makes when it's struck is the call to practice. It calls us to the Zendo. And you can see underneath the inscription, great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake, don't waste this precious life. And whether we're aware of it or not, this is the great matter that calls us to practice. The great matter of birth and death. And that things go by quickly. And this is our chance to meet our precious life. It calls us to a retreat, to be with each other. And then if you go clockwise, we begin with, oh, look, see, I don't have, I have the robe chant out of order. I have it up in the upper left, right-hand corner, because that's what we did when we were sitting before you stood up to do service. It's what the monks would do in the Zendo to put on their rakusu or their okesa before they go to the Buddha hall, because in a classical monastery, there'd be two different rooms, the room for sitting and the room for service and ceremonies. And you chant, vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction, wearing the universal teaching. I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. There's a tremendous amount of teaching in that, which we're going to return to. But it reminds us that what's vast is liberation. And this formless field of basic goodness is what we're resting in. And then when we realize this and embody it, we put it on our bodies, we begin to harmonize with the universe. So we're called to practice by the Han. At the end of Zazen, we chant the robe chant, and then we come to clarifying the way in the bottom left-hand corner there. We stand up, literally and figuratively and unconsciously and intentionally, stand up in the middle of our life and say, this is me. All my ancient tangled karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind. I now fully admit that this is my life. It doesn't say I'm a terrible sinner or there's something wrong. It says, this is my life. This is what I practice with. And if I'm going to practice with everything in my life, where do I stand? Where do I find the place to be held? And those are the refuges. Taking refuge in Buddha, the teacher, the essence of our own nature, Buddha nature, the Dharma, the way life actually is, the way things flow, and then the Sangha, our connection with everyone. And in both of these, you see I've made a note where we chanted, I take refuge, we take refuge, all being now takes refuge. The same with the repentance. I avow, we avow, all being now avows. When you begin to chant in these three ways, it seems strange to me now to just chant I all the time. That this is something that I'm practicing, that we are practicing, that is practiced at all times. So if we're called to practice, we take it on in our bodies, we stand up in the middle of our life and say, yes, I admit this is me, and I will rest in this vast, it's part of the formless field of benefaction, in the arms and the lap of Buddha, and the Dharma that is holding me at all times and infusing me with life and with the connection with Sangha, my friends. And then I can practice. And that's the heart of practice at the upper left-hand corner. If the sort of poetic version of the Four Noble Truths. When I'm caught in the self-centered dream of my own small self, then I will suffer. And as I hold the self-centered thoughts and these perspectives, which are quite self-referenced, then that is the dream. But if each moment we can meet life as it is, then that's the teacher. You know, Joko Beck often wouldn't actually use the word Buddha. She would just say life as it is. That is the Dharma. That is Buddha, is this life. And being each moment is the way of compassion. It's also the way of wisdom, where we allow it to teach us instead of thwart us. And if we move around the circle past embodying the teachings, because that's what we need to do, we need to embody what we're learning. We have to go out into the world, being practice in the world, Bodhisattva's vow. Beings are numberless, delusions are inexhaustible, Dharma gates are boundless, Buddha's way is unsurpassable. And we use those as our Dharma gates, as our opportunities for practice, if we can maintain beginner's mind. And I've added one that we don't chant, a couple of them. This one always coming back. This small verse is used at the end of almost all of our Zen ceremonies. We live like a cloud in an endless sky, like a lotus in muddy water, one with the pure mind of Buddha. It's a beautiful expression of our, what appears to be our dualistic nature. Someone asked about paradox last night, you know. We live like a cloud in an endless sky, that vast, open freedom of liberation, but also like a lotus in muddy water, stuck in the everyday mud of existence. And that is one nature, the nature of awakening. And interestingly, if we see this as a circle, that brings us back to the Han, knowing that we're called to practice. In the middle is a word that we use just for our description of our center in Austin, Appamada, but it's also the last word of the Buddha in the Pali Canon as he was dying. And his students were asking what to do. He said, practice with Appamada, with diligent, mindful care. With diligent, mindful care, which is the expression of beginner's mind as well. He called it the elephant's footprint in one of his talks earlier in his life. He said, Appamada is the elephant's footprint. It's the biggest footprint in the forest. All the other footprints fit inside of it. This is the essential teaching. Diligent, mindful care. So there's a flow to what we're voicing in our chanting and embodying in that chant. And so a service isn't just the repetition of liturgy. It's the embodiment of all of the teachings, which we're called to by this particular practice. So when we began the first section in the book, Right Practice, you've already begun both the sitting and you've already immersed yourself in the teachings, in the service. So I hope you get a feel for this is not something you're doing. These are not separate things. They're different aspects of one thing. So let's just walk through the sections in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, so we get a feel for what Suzuki Roshi is teaching. And the first small chapter in Right Practice is posture. And this is where we start. We sit down in the morning for our first period of Zazen, and we try to take an upright, dignified posture. It's not leaning one way or the other, that isn't rigid, but is full of life and vitality. In that small chapter, it says, enlightenment is not some good feeling or some particular state of mind. The state of mind that exists when you sit in the right posture is itself enlightenment. That is a very radical statement. And it's very different than most people think about practice. When it says enlightenment is not some good feeling, wait a minute. I thought that's what I was going to get by practicing some good feeling. And it's not some particular state of mind, like I'm not going to reach enlightenment and then boom, like on some special effects, I'll suddenly have a new way of looking at the world. It actually will be very disappointing because it's not something special in that way. The state of mind that exists when you sit in the right posture is itself enlightenment. It's settling in your life, as your life, but awake to it without being caught in the self-centered dream. But this is hard to talk about. In fact, Danae, are you there? Right there. Here she is online.
Yep, I'm here.
Great. So you sent me something from this section. And do you have it with you there? If you don't, I'll tell you what it is. It doesn't matter.
I think I do.
Because it was very short. It was very brief, and it's really important to start with, I think.
It was the teaching which is written on paper is not the true teaching.
So as you open the book and look on the paper, so tell me some about how that, why you would send me that.
Because I look around my room where I'm sitting and I have all these books and I feel like I need to read them. It's so important for me to understand all these books, and feels like a pressure for me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think what the author is trying to say is when you're alert and aware, that's the important thing, not a bunch of words written in a book.
Yeah. So we're gonna do a poll here. So everyone who has a whole bunch of Buddhist books and reads them and thinks these kind of things that Danae thinks, raise your hand. It's very common. Of course we do. We need kind of I say sometimes we need a 12-step program for Amazon, you know, because we just keep saying, oh, that one looks good, that one looks good, and they keep coming, right? It's natural. But I think that it's partly because we have a hunger or a thirst. Remember that quote about it's wisdom seeking wisdom yesterday? There's something in us that's longing for something and that really wants to do something. And then we overlay it with our school, like I better do my assignment, or if I could just read enough things, or if I could just understand it, then I would be finally free. But the impulse is for freedom, not reading. The impulse is for something deeper, isn't it? That you think by doing this will get that for you. There's a very famous quote attributed to Bodhidharma, who was the sort of quasi-mythical figure who brought Buddhism from India into China. And when asked about the Dharma, or Zen, he said, it's a special transmission outside the scriptures, not dependent on words and letters, pointing directly to the human mind, seeing into one's nature and attaining Buddhahood. The special transmission outside the scriptures, not depending on words and letters. And yet we have all these words and letters. Here, you set me up to do an hour-long Dharma talk. It's a little confusing, isn't it? There's the sentence that follows the one that you sent me, Danae. If you go back to it, what's the sentence that follows? Or two sentences or so. Make sure you unmute yourself. Yeah, there you
go. Okay, let's see.
So start with where you did the teaching, which is written.
The teaching which is written on paper is not the true teaching. Written teaching is a kind of food for your brain. Of course, it's necessary to take some food for your brain, but it is more important to be yourself by practicing the right way of life.
Oh. There's a great story told by Steve Hagen, who was a senior student of Katagiri Roshi, who was one of the young Zen priests that Suzuki Roshi brought from Japan to help him when he was developing the Zen Center in San Francisco and at Tassajara. And Katagiri ended up going, as many of you know, to Minneapolis and developing the Zen Center there. And Steve was one of his students. And Steve said for a long time he would listen to Katagiri talk, just like we read these things and hear Suzuki's words, and he couldn't understand what he was talking about. He kept trying. And then one day it began to open up, and he began to really realize what his teacher was pointing to. But he said he didn't say anything for a whole year. And finally, one day he said to Katagiri, he said, I finally see what you're trying to show me, but we can't talk about these things. Words, and you smile and shake your head. We can't talk. And Katagiri said, yeah, you're right. But we have to say something or no one will ever understand. And the book of Steve's edited talks of Katagiri, like these edited talks of Suzuki, the title of that book is You Have to Say Something. Because we have to use language, don't we? So further down in that chapter that you were pointing to, Danae, and thank you for offering us that. Suzuki says, usually without being aware of it, we try to change something other than ourselves. We try to order things outside of us. But it's impossible to organize things if you yourself are not in order. When we do things in the right way at the right time, everything else will be organized. That's the secret of Buddhism. Now, he's using words that sound a little directive, like do the right thing, and that kind of. But I think what he's suggesting is, well, let's go. His next sentence is, so try to always keep the right posture. He doesn't say try to be a good person. Try to keep the right posture, not only when you practice Zazen, but in all your activities. Like, what would that mean? You keep the right posture in all of your activities. What would it mean to... So he's obviously not talking about sitting, no matter what you do. What kind of posture is he talking about? He says, take the right posture when you're driving your car, when you're reading. If you read in a slump position, you cannot stay awake long. Try. You'll discover how important it is to keep the right. There's something about uprightness and fullness of presence, I think, that he's speaking about. And then your quotation comes after that today. I was interested because later he says in that small chapter, he says that's why Buddha would not accept the religious teachings at his time. He studied many religions, but he was not satisfied with it. Because it wasn't taking him where he was called to go. But later on, Suzuki writes, when he found himself, he found that everything that exists has Buddha nature. And he was talking about the Buddha, and that was his enlightenment. And then the quote, enlightenment is not some good feeling or a particular state of mind. The state of mind that exists when you sit in the right posture is itself enlightenment. And then he makes the strong statement, if you cannot be satisfied with the state of mind you have in Zazen, it means your mind is still wandering about. Our body and mind should not be wobbly and wandering about. In this posture, there's no need to talk about the right state of mind. You already have it. This is the conclusion of Buddhism, and this takes us back to your statement. But it's so unsatisfying, and I know it's difficult to think, well, my state of mind when I'm sitting is Buddha. When I sit, I just hurt and go to sleep or think about things, or worry. Like, really? So it's going to take us a little more to understand what he's talking about here. The next section under posture is breathing. And I'm just going to draw out a couple of things in this one. Suzuki Roshi says, we say inner world and outer world, but actually it's just one whole world. And this limitless world, our throat is like a swinging door. This is an analogy that you hear a lot when people study these teachings. Oh, it's like a swinging door. If you say, I breathe, the I is extra. What we call I is just a swinging door which moves when we inhale and exhale. It just moves. That's all. When your mind is pure and calm enough to follow this movement, there is nothing, no I, no world, no body, no mind, just a swinging door. And I'm emphasizing this because it's a really great example of how, with a very common analogy like breathing and this interesting allusion to a swinging door, he's talking about the deepest practices of non-duality in all of the sutras. That, oh, there's no mind, there's no body, there's just a swinging door. At first you go, well, what does that mean? It's a little confusing. But he's pointing to the essence of the way that we separate out me and the universe over there. And there's just one activity. There's just one whole beautiful activity happening all the time. And it expresses itself in this vast array that we see, which is kind of a miracle. In the next section, which is titled Control, it points to another aspect of this. And this, one of my favorite quotes is in here. He says, the reason everything looks beautiful is because it's out of balance, because its background is always in perfect harmony. This is how everything exists in the realm of Buddha nature, losing its balance against a background of perfect balance. It's one of the most beautiful descriptions of the absolute and the relative I've ever heard. We live continuously off balance against a background of perfect balance. It's very simple and direct. We live in this crazy, changing, interdependent, unsatisfying, limited world from our perspective, which is moving and flowing perfectly in complete harmony all the time, and will continue after we're gone, and was flowing just fine before we arrived. We live continually off balance in our small world against this background of perfect balance. And perfect, catches people up because we say, oh, everything is perfect from the absolute. We think, most people think that means like preferable. Like perfection is like my preference. Now, perfection is everything is a perfect response to all the causes and conditions that created it. There's no other way. Everything is only a perfect expression or response to everything that created it. Because we react to that, we suffer. There are ways to respond, of course, which takes care of us. And it's not that we abandon our capacity to respond appropriately. But this is, we live constantly off balance against the background of perfect balance. He takes it another step further in mind waves, which is the next little chapter. And you'll begin to see, and this is one of the reasons I put the chants in an inso, you begin to see that it's repetition over and over. See, I want you to sympathize with me for a moment, okay? So how many things do I have to teach? A couple. And then I have to find all these different ways to teach it, because it's only one thing. So under mind waves, he writes, big mind experiences everything within itself. Big mind, big heart experiences everything within itself. You remember the elephant's footprint? Everything falls within big mind. It's not a new kind of mind that you're going to have, because it's not a conditioned phenomena. It's not one that comes and goes. It's the background consciousness that I was talking about last night. And then he asks a question. He says, do you understand the difference between these two minds? The mind that includes everything, and the mind which is related to something. Actually, they're the same thing, but the understanding is different. And your attitude towards your life will be different according to which understanding you have. It's a very complete expression of practice. Do you understand the difference between these two minds? Do you understand when you chant the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, boundlessness is emptiness, boundlessness is form, is the same thing. The mind which includes everything and the mind which is related to something. They're actually the same thing, depending on how you're looking. Like light, particle, wave, that kind of analogy. But your attitude towards life will be very different according to which understanding you have. And that's why we sit. We sit in Zazen over time, and then we have longer, this is a very brief retreat, longer retreats. You sit a lot over a long period of time, and you can become very tired. But what happens is your mind and your heart struggles to maintain itself as an individual, thinking about what you're doing. There's so many times I would go to retreat, imagining what it would be like the story I told last night. But over and over, and I would arrive and I would finally be there, because I had to work hard to leave my everyday busy professional life to spend some time at Zen Center to train. And so it was a big deal to me. So I would get there and I would finally be there, and I'd be sitting in Zazen, and then I would think, what the hell am I doing? Why am I here? I would suddenly be full of doubt, like, why did I spend all that time and energy and money to try to do this? Because nothing was happening. Because I was negotiating with all my expectations and illusions about what was supposed to happen. And day after day, slowly that would wear out. And I would stop looking for an object to achieve, or a place to get, or a solution to arrive at. And I would finally have to attune with and align with the only thing that was here, which is me. And understand what this is. But in the meantime, I would experience what the next little chapter is, called Mind Weeds. He writes, even though you have some difficulty in your practice, which I was just describing, even though you have some waves while you're sitting, these waves themselves will help you. So you should not be bothered by your mind. Easy for him to say, right? Should not be bothered by your mind. You should rather be grateful for the weeds, because eventually they will enrich your practice. If you have some experience of how the weeds in your mind change into mental nourishment, your practice will make remarkable progress. You will feel how they change into self-nourishment. Of course, it's not difficult to give some philosophical or psychological interpretation of your practice. But that's not good enough. You must have the actual experience of how our weeds change into nourishment. You know, as a psychologist and as a teacher, there are times when we do try to interpret and say, this is what's happening, that's what's happening. And it's a little bit like Janae saying, you know, the real teaching is not what's on the paper. It's not the interpretations. It's not the finger pointing at the moon. How do you end up bathed in moonlight? Not understanding what the moon is or how you got there, but the fullness of experience. Then something shifts in a deeper level. And the next small chapter is called the Marrow of Zen. And I'm not going to go through it, but in that chapter, he talks about this idea about the bad horses and the good horses. There's a whole imagery of that, but this is what we think about when we're in practice sometimes. He writes, when you may think that when you sit in Zazen, you'll find out whether you're one of the best horses or one of the worst ones. We get into this practice, you know, you're watching everybody else. It's like, they seem to be sitting like really still and they seem okay. And I feel terrible or something, whatever it is you're doing. But there's a misunderstanding of Zen. You know, and when we were just talking about mind weeds and mind waves, there's a statement that Dogen makes. He said, you know, we try to practice to get something, but ultimately we have to take what he calls the backward step, to turn your light inward, to illuminate yourself. So when a difficulty arises, when I would think, what am I doing here? I could see that as a psychological thing. I have doubt. I don't know what I'm doing. What's wrong with me? I'm a bad student. I go a whole narrative about that. So I went to Blanche and I told her this story in Dokusan. I said, every day of my life, literally, I think about being here and practicing and studying with you. And now I'm here, and all I think of is, what am I doing? What is this? What am I doing? And she said, if you come to practice and you're not asking that question, then you're not a serious student. That's the fundamental question. What is this? What am I doing? She said, so go back into the Zendo and sit down and ask yourself, what am I doing sitting on this cushion? What am I doing here at the Zen Center in San Francisco? And then she paused and she looked right at me and she said, what am I doing in this life? What is this? And that's the backward step. Instead of trying to solve a problem, it becomes nourishment for practice. If I have a simple reactivity to someone in the Sangha and I wonder, why are they doing that? This is irritating. I could focus on them, or I could notice, oh, there's something triggered. And I could think about it psychologically and do all the stuff I know to do in that way. But it's more that it's the turn and the simple being with what's there that begins to illuminate. Oh, this is how I maintain a self. This is how I self. This is how I create that thing that causes suffering, by holding to the ideas that I have. And Suzuki Roshi says, if you're trying to be the best horse, this is not the right understanding. If you practice Zen in this way, it doesn't matter whether you're the best horse or the worst one. And then he writes something very interesting. He says, when you consider the mercy of Buddha, how do you think Buddha will feel about the 4 kinds of horses? He will have more sympathy for the worst one than for the best one. And when you're determined to practice Zazen with the great mind of Buddha, you'll find the worst horse is the most valuable one. In your very imperfections, you will find the basis for your firm way-seeking mind. I say that we are messy miracles. And because we're so enchanted with the mess, we don't see the miraculous. And yet it comes down to being very ordinary. In fact, Judith, you had sent me something about the next section, which is nothing special. Do you have that with you?
I have my fingertips across the book. Yes, actually, I had a bookmark in it.
Yeah. Well, read that part that you sent me.
And if you continue this simple practice every day, you will obtain some wonderful powers. Before you attain it, it is something wonderful. But after you attain it, it is nothing special.
Beautiful. So say a little about what called you to that one.
I think my comment when I sent it to you was that this tracks my experience of practicing Zazen. Something to that effect, anyway.
I tell you what, is it possible to come sit in the chair so I can see you closer? The chair that's up here by the camera? Bring your
If you say something.
Yeah, bring your book with you. You might need it.
I'll bring
Bring
my
your book
book.
with you. Yeah, you might need it.
You don't believe I have it memorized?
I can hear you, but I miss seeing your face. Yeah, that's fine. If you continue this simple practice every day, you will obtain some wonderful power. Before you obtain it, it's something wonderful, but after you obtain it, it's nothing special. You've been practicing a long time.
Yes.
And quite diligently too, which I have great respect for. So you've continued this simple practice for many, many, many days. And I would imagine, this is my projection, so you tell me, because I think you and I share this. In practicing, I really did hope that something wonderful would happen if I practiced a long time.
Yes.
And that I would be freed from all those things that I didn't like about myself and would obtain a view of the world that would be, it would really benefit me quite a bit. And so when he says, before you obtain it, it is something wonderful. But after you obtain it, and we're just ordinary folks, but it's not that you've had some experience of this. It's nothing special. Does that make sense to you now at this point in your practice?
Does that make sense to me? Yes, but I'm hard pressed to say how.
Well, that's the Danae's thing, it's hard to make the words, isn't it? Yeah, it is. But when you sit there and you just, I'm looking at you, you look at my face on the screen, you have all of these friends and people behind you, they got your back. What's the feeling?
What's the feeling right here, right now?
Yeah, what's the feeling of this moment like this? I don't mean, not asking a psychological question so much in a way, but what's the spirit? What's the feeling of this?
Two words come to my mind: calm, support.
Yeah. This obviously is important to you, or you wouldn't keep the Zen group going there, and you wouldn't have called me to come teach, and you wouldn't have continued to try to keep this lamp lit. So there's something there, even if you don't know how to express it in words, that has light and has warmth in it, like an actual lamp with a little fire in it.
It makes me think of when sometimes, actually this happened recently. It hasn't happened for quite a while, but recently I showed up here at the appointed time for Soto Zen practice, and no one else came. And I was reminded, this used to happen when I led Rinzai Zen here. And I would remind myself, that's not important, just keep showing up. Keep the opportunity there.
That's the spirit I'm talking about. Yeah, it's kind of lovely to just go ahead and set the altar and light the candle and offer incense, sit, do chanting. Even if there's not another body there, because you're doing it for all beings and you're holding the space. As I said last night, the Dharma is only alive if it has a channel to flow through in this way. And so you keep that. You know, after your quotation, there's a section, I'm gonna read it. You don't have to look it up, but you can if you want. You see that? Maybe you'll find it. That place is, I do not feel like speaking after Zazen.
Yes.
Yeah, read a few sentences there.
I do not feel like speaking after Zazen. I feel the practice of Zazen is enough. But if I must say something, I think I would like to talk about how wonderful it is to practice Zazen. Our purpose is just to keep this practice forever. This practice started from beginningless time, and it will continue into an endless future. Strictly speaking, for a human being, there is no other practice than this practice. There is no other way of life than this way of life. Zen practice is the direct expression of our true nature.
And then one more sentence.
Of course, whatever we do is the expression of our true nature, but without this practice, it is difficult to realize.
So that was what you were just actually expressing, isn't it? Sometimes you don't have many words, but you feel like Zazen is enough. So you just keep the practice. And that's what I appreciate you're doing there. Our purpose is just to keep this practice forever. And I think you have practiced long enough and you're old enough, like that you realize that, well, this is enough. This is all we do. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thanks for offering this quotation so we could reflect on it in this way.
Am I excused now?
At the end of that chapter that Judith was focusing on, it says the most important thing is to forget all gaining ideas, all dualistic ideas. In other words, just practice Zazen in a certain posture. Don't think about anything, just remain on your cushion without expecting anything. That eventually you will resume your own true nature. Oh, eventually you will resume your own true nature. That is to say, your own true nature resumes itself. So there's something about returning to something essential rather than trying to gain something special. And so we've really gone through this first section of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And you can see, I hope, how important it is for these things that the students have sent me to deep. It's so lovely to move into it with the conversation, with this relational piece that, and it's not too late. If you want to send me something, by the way, you can do so over your lunch break. If you're like, oh, I didn't send anything, I want to send something. Because I love the conversation. It's really, really great. I'm going to revisit, in the light of all this, I'm going to revisit the inso that I showed you a while ago before we break. You got that? So let's start back. Remember the practice, the Han called us to practice. But I don't have the chants up here. I have something else showing there. What is your, let me see if I can even make it bigger for you. Is that better? Suzuki Roshi would say, what is your inmost request? When you hear the sound of the Han calling you to practice, what's the deepest call? And what continues to call you? Like last night, I said, what keeps me coming back, even when it's not pleasant sometimes? That's what's essential. What is this inmost request? What was Blanche saying of, what am I doing in this life? And when we're called, then we move to clarifying the way. All my ancient tangled karma from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion is beginningless. It's not your fault. This is just the way it is. What it comes with being a human is all the karma that created who and what you are. But it is your responsibility. We say it's born through body, speech, and mind. So we do have to meet it. And looking deeply with discernment, not judgment. With discernment, not judgment. With discernment, not judgment. Oh, this is me. This is who I am. This is what I avow. And that clarification actually calls forward a profound acceptance. When we look into the life that we actually have, that's taking refuge. You know, the Buddha did all of the practices that he was given by his teachers. Siddhartha Gautama did this, and he mastered all of them. Apparently, he was a really good practitioner. And it didn't answer his question about suffering. So he was stopped. He was actually a failure because all the practices he was given didn't answer the question. So he just sat down under a tree. And all he was left with was the life that he had, his own body, his own heart, his own mind. And that's what you have when you put down everything else. So he was able to find freedom there. And we can find freedom here. That Buddha is right here. Dharma is your life. Sangha are your relationships. It's all right here for you. So then we can practice the very heart of practice. Stepping beyond our narratives and stories, which we think are the truth, because we believe them, and take the backward step that turns your light inward, which I mentioned, and begin to accord with reality. I think in that last quote, I said something about, imagine the Buddha's mercy, you know, on the worst horse. Remember that quote, that line? The wonderful Christian Catholic teacher, Richard Rohr, which I know some of you know and probably follow his things. He had the most beautiful line when he said that this sort of awakening that we're talking about, we become a riverbed of mercy. Isn't that a beautiful image? The riverbed of mercy. We don't become the river. We become the riverbed, we become the space in which mercy can flow. Mercy for all existence. But that's an embodied, that's an embodied thing, embodying the teachings, that liberation is vast. And I can say, have faith, but embodying faith in wholehearted practice is what we're doing when we're sitting zazen. So we end up being that which calls others to practice. And that's harmony. Like when I chose Blanche for my teacher because I saw her bowing and doing service, her embodiment is what called me, not her words, not something she was teaching me by intellect. She was showing me something and it was calling me. That's embodying the teachings. And we have to take that out into the world, which is the next, being practiced in the world Bodhisattva's vow, which you chanted earlier. And the Bodhisattva has, we'll get to this later, single-minded way. Like no matter what you do, it's the only practice you're doing, to attend to all beings, to support them, to clarify all delusions, to use every opportunity to awaken and to embody the Buddha way through zazen. Those are the four that we chant. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Attend to all beings with kindness, clarify all delusions as they arise, to step through every gate as a way to awaken and to embody Buddha's way. And then this, we live like a cloud in an endless sky, always coming back. We are limited. We are a lotus that only grows by being in the muddy water and the muck, not purified, but out of the mud of being an everyday messy human. That's where awakening flows. And we are vast, even though we are also limited, and we are the messy miracles that humans are. So in the center, just be kind. Maybe that's enough. Just be kind. So maybe that's enough for this section. We can go enjoy a beautiful lunch. I think that's what's next, right? Is that right?
Yes, we go to lunch.
So thank you. There's when I was at Takahara, Suzanne, you have a question?
Could you send that to us, that slide?
Oh, I can send both of those to you, yeah.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, they're just little notes on there really, but hope they may be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
There are longer chants that one does in monasteries, you know, for meals, but there's a short version we would do when I was working at Tassajara in the summer, because we were busy. So all the kitchen crew and the serving crew would get together, and we would chant. I'm going to say the lines for you. I've got so many chants in my mind I can't remember it. Do you ever do that? It's like, wait a minute, where did it go? We give thanks for this food.
We give thanks for this food.
It'll come, hold on. Here we go. I'm going to say the lines, then we'll do it together, okay? Here are the three lines. I'll just say them first. We revere the three treasures. That's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. We revere the three treasures and give thanks for this food, the work of many people, and the transformation of other forms of life. So I'll do each line. You just say it back to me. Revere the three treasures.
We revere the three treasures.
And give thanks for this food,
And give thanks for this food.
the work of many people,
The work of many people.
and the transformation of other forms of life.
And the transformation of other forms of life.
Back. In a little
Okay, let's see.